Right, well, good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
What is it? Well, there it is. It's an unassuming block of sandstone with two iron rings in either side, one in either side, so you can put a pole through it, and if there's enough of you, you can hoist it up and carry it on your shoulder. It weighs about 300 weight, so it'd probably take a few people, so it's portable. That's the first thing to notice about it. It's portable, and it's always designed to be portable. Now you might think, well, there's not much to say about just a lump of stone. Well, it's got various names. The first one is Jacob's Pillow Stone. And that's because there's a legend that goes with it. Those of you who've read your Bible, who's read the Bible? Just about everyone. Good. In the book of Genesis, there's a guy called Jacob, who's the grandson of Abraham. He's the son of Isaac. And his mother's tricked her elder son, tricked the father into giving the blessing to the younger son instead of the older one. Jacob's the younger one. The older one's really furious, so Jacob has to run away from home and go and stay with his uncle in Haran, in case his brother's going to kill him. And while he's on the run, he's at this place called Luz, which is in what's now Israel, in what's the West Bank part of Israel. And he lies down and he's going to sleep, and he takes a stone and he rests his head on it as his pillow, and he has a dream. And in his dream he sees a ladder going up to heaven and angels coming up and down it. And God promises him all sorts of stuff, that he's going to have lots of offspring, that they're going to be nations, and he's going to have the land. So, he wakes up from his dream in the morning and says, "Oh my God, this is the house of God." And he raises up the stone, he pours oil over it as an offering, uses as an altar. And this is supposed to be that very stone, all right? So that's the first legend associated with the Stone of Destiny. It's also called the Stone of Scone. I got the pronunciation right. Because it was nabbed from Scone in Scotland. It was used as a stone that kings were crowned on. The kings of Scotland had been from about 894 or something in Scone itself. And Edward I brought it back. I'll show you him in a minute. It's also called Leafale. It's the Irish name for it, which is interesting because it's a palindrome. You can spell it the same either way if you read it backwards or forwards. And that kind of means the stone of luck or destiny or, fate. And it used to have written on it, or there was a caption put with it, which said, "Ni fallat fallum Scotti quocumque locatum invenient lapidum regnare tenento ibidem." Of course, you all understand Latin, so I don't need to translate that, do I? Well, the translation says, "Unless the fates be faulty grown and prophet's voice be vain, where'er is found this sacred stone, the Scottish race shall reign." Well, that's written by Sir Walter Scott. So he's got a vested interest, hasn't he? But anyway, you won't find that written on it now, or there must have been a piece of paper or something on it that had that on. Anyway, in 1296, Edward I, the King of the Scots, King of England, the hammer of the Scots, he defeated them in battle, and he went and he brought back the Stone of Destiny to Westminster, along with the Scottish Royal Regalia. He returned the Scottish Royal Regalia later on, but he kept the stone. And he had a special chair made for it, which is now the Coronation Seat. And the kings and queens of Great Britain, or of England first, and then later Scotland after 1603, and now Great Britain, have nearly all been crowned on it. I think there's only a couple that weren't. I think one was King John, and Queen Mary I. She refused to be crowned on it, had a special chair sent over from Rome. but everybody else has been crowned on it, with the stone underneath as a witness. Because the idea is that when you're taking your coronation, you're being crowned, you could take an oath, and the stone bears witness to the oath. And I suppose the idea is that a stone is a pretty permanent sort of thing, and everybody's seen you being crowned on that stone. They're all going to remember, and you break your oath, well, it's going to cause trouble. Anyway, in 1950, it got nicked on Christmas Day by a bunch of Scottish students, Scottish nationalists, in fact, from Edinburgh University, I think they were. And Glasgow University, was it? Makes sense. Anyway, they broke in and they nicked it. And there was hoo-ha. There's actually been a film made about this recently. I went to see it. And they brought it back to Scotland. First of all, they hid it in Surrey, I think. They sort of thought everyone's going to think we're going straight back to Scotland with it, so we'll go down, we'll take the other direction, go to Surrey, let the hoo-ha die down, and then we'll take it to Scotland, which they did. But they returned it. They realised after a few weeks that, what are they going to do with it? They've got it. If they hang on to it, it's just going to get lost, or things are going to happen. And in fact, it was broken during the theft. As the guy pulled it out from under the throne, and it's much heavier than he was expecting. It sort of a boom on the floor. And I think it had a crack already, but they claim it was broken because the suffragettes tried to blow it up at one point, and they reckon that that's what damaged it. But that's their story, isn't it? Anyway, it got returned, and the Queen was the last person to be crowned on it in 1953. It hasn't been used since. God bless Her Majesty. She certainly goes on, doesn't she? Prince Charles must be wondering whether he's ever going to get to sit on it, because it's, there's now going to be some problems about it. Sir John Major. Sorry, I'm coming to the esoteric stuff shortly. We're just going through the history at the moment, the known history. John Major, in 1996, he was very worried about the opinion polls, and he was told by, was it Forsyth, the Minister for Scotland, that it had been promised that it would be returned to Scotland in 1950. They promised that it was going to be sent back, and in 50 years. Well, the millennium was coming up. There was an election coming the following year. He thought he would curry favour up north by returning it. They'd all be so pleased they'd all go out and vote Conservative. Well, of course, that didn't happen. He subsequently lost the election in 1997 to the Labour Party, with Tony Blair becoming the new Prime Minister. And Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, they welcomed the Stone's return to Scotland, but only as a museum piece. They were not at all interested in it as symbolising anything. It's just a symbol of royalty as far as they're concerned, and they really couldn't give a damn about it. So when the new Scottish Edinburgh Parliament was built at huge expense, it caused a lot of ructions up north about how much money was being spent on that, because they had another Parliament building which was perfectly good, they could have used. But anyway, they built this. It looks actually rather nice from a distance, but when you go inside, it all looks jerry-built. Well, that's another story. But you won't find the stone there. So where is it now? It's actually in Edinburgh Castle, which is interesting because Edinburgh Castle belongs to the Queen. Now, notionally, if it ever came to it, and they were saying, no, we're not going to let you take the stone out, they could block off Edinburgh Castle, land a helicopter, pop it on board, and fly it back to Westminster. I think that might well have been in the minds of the monarch, in the mind of the monarch. Anyway, back in Westminster, you now have the Coronation Seat, looking like a mouth that's had its teeth pulled out. It's a very sorry sight. It's like a discarded film prop. Even if it's 700 years plus old, it kind of looks like it's just rubbish now. It's not needed. And I think that's kind of not a very good symbol for our nation, really, for our Coronation Seat to be looking like it's vacant, empty, not needed, discarded. But maybe if you're Tony Blair and you're very keen on the European Union, that's what you wanted. But I don't know. There is an understanding that it will be returned for future coronations, but no one really believes this. And if Scotland becomes independent and still keeps the monarchy, which is a big if, it's likely there'll have to be two coronations, one in England and one in Scotland. That's my opinion. Unless, as I say, the Queen lands ahead, or she won't be around, would she? But Prince Charles, or maybe it might even be William, has a helicopter landed to bring the stone back.
If it's William, he'd take the helicopter himself.
He would, wouldn't he? He doesn't need to ask anyone's permission. He can go up in his own helicopter. So, next question is it genuine? I mean, is this all just a load of nonsense? Just a bit of typical British eccentricity being played out using stones and thrones? Well, this is not the stone, by the way. This is just someone's made a lump of concrete with a couple of hooks. And, well, actually, it's probably made of papier-mâché, since they can all carry it. But there's Alex Salmond there. And this must have been in 96. And he said, "There's no suggestion that Bertie Gray made copies," said Mr. Salmond. "It's like the Loch Ness Monster. It's certainly a puzzle and a mystery which is best not definitively answered." You can just, so excuse my accent. But you can imagine Alex Salmond saying that. I'm going to come back to Bertie Gray because he's actually quite an important figure in this story. But we'll be coming back to him at the end, so I'll say no more about that. So, what's it all about? Well, Ian Hamilton, QC, he was the leader. He's the guy who pulled it out of the throne and dropped it. He's now in his 90s, still alive, amazingly. And he says that he's one of the ones who stole the relic, and he says he remains convinced it's the real thing that Edward I got the real thing. Because there's another... if you go up to Scotland and you talk to Scottish nationalist type people, they say, well, you know, when Edward came here, they just gave him a drain cover. You know, we got the real one tucked away, hidden. The British never had it. Yeah. Well, he says he's convinced it's the real thing. And he says here that had it been a substitute for Edward to carry off, it would have been produced when the king, Robert the Bruce, regained his kingdom. In other words, Robert the Bruce would have been crowned on the real one if they got it still, and he wasn't. So, you know, the real one was down in Westminster at that time. So the one that's been returned now is the same one. That must be the real thing. So what is this legendary history of the Stone of Destiny? Well, we're going to go through the history backwards, so to speak. So this is Scone Palace. This is actually not all that old, this building. There used to be an abbey here. And next to there, this is where there's something called the Moot Hill. If you ever go there, actually Scone is a really nice place to go. If you ever go to Scotland, up to Perth, it's a beautiful park, and they do very nice cream teas with scones. Anyway, they used to crown the Scottish kings here, and what would happen was all the nobility would gather round and they would acclaim the king. This is the very important part. We still do this in Westminster. You know, all the earls are gathered there, and the dukes and the rest of them, all in their ermines with their coronets on, and they all stand there and they acclaim the candidate for the throne, the last one being the Queen, of course. And that's a very important part of the whole thing, because if you're not acclaimed, you're not accepted by the people, you know, so you don't get to do the oath bit. And they used to do this on this hill, and there's a little chapel there, and you can see yours truly sitting on a facsimile of the stone, like every other tourist that goes there. You want to go and have a selfie taken with yourself sitting on the stone. How could I resist? But anyway, this is the place where they used to do it, apparently, before Edward came along. Now I'm going to say a little bit more about Scotland, first of all. And my apologies to any Scots here. if I leave things out. I'm just a Kentish man. I don't really understand Scotland very well. I do my best. Anyway, originally in the Middle Ages, the early Middle Ages, Scotland was 4 kingdoms, 4 separate parts. You had the Edinburgh bit, which was actually English, believe it or not. It was peopled by the Angles and the Saxons. And Edinburgh is actually named after a Northumbrian King Edwin. They don't tell you that in the Scottish textbooks. Glasgow bit down here, they were Britons. They were like the Welsh. They were Strathclyde Britons. And they spoke sort of Welsh. And then you had this northeasterly bit. It was the Picts. And they call them Picts. The Romans called them Picts from pictum, meaning picture, painting, because they used to tattoo themselves. They still do. And they were divided into southern Picts and northern Picts, but we don't need to go into that at the moment. And then from about 6th century onwards, early 6th century, the Dalriada Scots invaded this part here from Ireland. They came across from Ulster, and it's actually no distance at all from the Mull of Kintyre across to sort of northern Antrim, I think it is. And they went across there, and you had a guy called Columba or Columkill. This little island of Iona here, that's called Mull, that bigger island. There's a little tiny island called Iona, and that's where they started crowning the kings of Dalriada, Scotland. And Columba or Columkill, Christian who converted the Picts later on, he crowned the first king of Scotland in that area there, in Iona. So we have here the movements of the Stone of Destiny. From Tara, it was taken up to Iona, and then it might have gone to Dunstafnage, but I haven't included that here. It goes across to Scone, or Scone, and that's in 846. And then it's taken down there to London, 1296, and then back up to Edinburgh in 1996. So we know those movements. It's pretty clear. So that takes us back to Ireland now, divided into 4 sub-kingdoms, and the high kings were at Tara. And that's an interesting place as well to go to if you're interested in antiquities, as I expect most of you are. And this brings us back to the so-called invasions of Ireland. When you go into the Irish annals, and they talk about the different peoples who came to Ireland at different times and different invasions. And they count, most of the accounts give us 5 different invasions. And first of all, there's the people of Caesar or Caesar or whatever they'd like to call it. And then you have the people of Bartholomew or Partholon. And those are kind of so far back, they're legendary, we don't know much about them at all. And they're actually not really relevant to us anyway, from what we're discussing. The next ones they call the Fir Bolg. And Fir means very much the same as the Latin vir, means man. And Bolg, I'm told, means bag. So what can, I'm told, mean trousers. So it's either the guys with the trousers or the guys with the bags. And I think the only thing I can think of is that it must mean bagpipes. Well, the people with bagpipes. They're generally thought to be the same people as in Britain we call the bell guy. And the bell guy occupied sort of what's now Belgium and down into parts of France, down into Burgundy area, but also parts of England. There were Belgae tribes, like the Atrebates, occupying southern England. And then we have people they call a Tuatha de Danaan. And then finally we have ones they call the Milesians. And it's only the last 2 I'm going to bother with. So the Tuatha de Danaan, and what does that mean? Well, if you look in sort of standard touristy, acceptable, politically correct textbooks, they'll all tell you, oh, Tuatha de Danaan, that means the people of Danu, the goddess. Well, I've not found any reference to any Danu goddess in any other context whatsoever. So I just don't know where they've got this from. It doesn't make sense to me. However, there is another translation, which is tribe of Dan. And that actually opens up a lot more. It makes a lot more sense. You begin to understand. So who is the tribe of Dan? Well, the tribe of Dan, they defeated the Fir Bolg and took most of Ireland. And nowadays, of course, if you go to Ireland and say, oh, the Tuatha de Danaan, they're kind of spirits. They kind of, sort of inhabit the land. They're sort of spooky things. Well, yeah, they're the older people, perhaps. They're said to have, in the annals, it says they framed the stone and kept it at their capital of Tara. Now, if you frame something, it doesn't mean you made it. It means you put it into something else, doesn't it? Which is very much what Edward I did when he framed it in his throne. So I'm beginning to see it in that context, that that's what they did, that they framed the stone and kept it in their capital of Tara. And this seems to be linked with the conquest of northern Israel by the Assyrians. And I'm going to explain that to you. Now, you've read your Bible, you all told me you had, or most of you. So you know all about King David and King Solomon and what, how they ruled in Jerusalem and Ark of the Covenant and Indiana Jones. And, you know all this Bible history. What you probably haven't read or have forgotten you ever read was there was actually a civil war after King Solomon died. Yeah, his successor, I think he's called Rehoboam, became king of Israel with his capital in Jerusalem. And he said, look, you think my father was strict in his taxation? Well, I'm going to tax you all the harder. And the northern kingdom, now there were 12 tribes. You remember that? 12 sons of Israel, 12 tribes, etc. The northern 10 said, well, tax what you like, mate, but we're off. And they chose their own king. I think he's called Jeroboam. And they established a new capital for themselves at a place called Samaria. And I think there might have been a bit of a small war, but they won it, and they were off. So then the southern kingdom, which was composed of just 2 tribes, Jerusalem is actually in the lands belonging to the tribe of Benjamin. And then you have the other tribe, Judah. And Judah and Benjamin formed a kingdom, which was then forth known as Judah or Judea, and the Jews are descended from that, right? But you had 10 other tribes, like Ephraim and Manasseh and Simeon and Naphtali and Ashdod and all those other ones. They had their own thing going up in the northern part of Israel. And you read the Bible, for a while you have the 2 kingdoms being discussed in parallel. But the northern guys are always naughty. They always don't do what God wants. They worship idols, they do this, that, and the other. They go the wrong way. So there was a splitting up of the kingdom of Israel, which occurred around 931 BC. And then the southern 2 tribes, now called Judah or Judea, northern 10 tribes continued to be known as Israel. Right, so the name Israel carried on, and not unreasonably, the 10 tribes said, well, most of us are here, we're Israel, you can be Judah. And if you look on the black obelisk of the Assyrians, you find that in the British Museum, by the way. It actually records something of this northern kingdom. In 853 BC, King Ahab of northern Israel was defeated by Shalmaneser III, king of Assyria. And you'll find that in the Assyrian annals. And on the black obelisk, you can see here, King Jehu of northern Israel pays homage to Shalmaneser. And there he is, bending down, paying homage to the king of the Assyrians on the black obelisk. Well, that wasn't enough. And the northern kingdom They were invaded and taken away into exile by the Assyrians in 722 BC. So Shalmaneser, or whoever it was, I think it might have been one of the others actually by that time, came in, carried the whole lot away, and took them off to the Caspian Sea, most of them, to the lands of the Medes, and he put other people back there. That's what the Assyrians used to do. They used to move people around, like chess pieces on a chessboard, so they wouldn't be too attached to wherever they were, and they would be kind of, thrown up in the air, and much easier to control that way. So that was the end of them. Bye-bye northern Israel, bye-bye, Samaria and all the rest of you. You're all gone. But that wasn't enough. In 712 and 701, he carried off most of the tribe of Judah as well. Left Jerusalem behind. They couldn't get in there. They were defeated. But an angel came along and struck down the Assyrian army. So they had to go home. But the 712 and 701, they carried off most of them. And if you go into the British Museum, you'll find among the big Assyrian slabs, those great big plaques on the wall they've got in the Assyrian galleries, you'll find here the sack of Lachish, which is a city in Judah by the Assyrians in 701 BC. And you can actually see, I don't know if you can see it so well here, but they're actually taking away the captives. So they were depopulating large areas to have a nice slave force that were going to do work for them. Not very nice people, the Assyrians, it has to be said. But if you're a Tuatha de Danaan, what are you going to do? Here you are, you're living in the land of Dan, which is on the coast. And you are people who use boats. You're traders. That's your role in life. You live in what area is now more or less Tel Aviv. You're on the coast, you've got nice beaches to sunbathe when you're in the summer, and then you've got your boats, and you go off and you do trading stuff, and you come back. You're not very far away from Jerusalem. You're not very far away from Bethel, which is where the stone supposedly was at the time of Israel, or Jacob, as we might call him. Ephraim, he's the leading tribe. This is the leading tribe of the northern kingdom, as it was. What are you going to do? Well, I'll tell you what I would do. I would get in my boats and I would get the hell out of there. Syrians on their way. We know what they're like. Never mind, it was lovely here while it lasted. Let's get out. And you've probably got friends elsewhere because you're a trader. You know all these people out there in other places. Particularly in Britain, you would know them because you've been busy buying tin from them for years, for centuries. The whole Bronze Age depended on having tin to mix with your copper. You get your copper from Cyprus, but you get your tin from Britain, from Cornwall particularly. So you know people all over the place, and you're not going to hang around, are you? So we're looking at the migration of the Danites, or the tribe of Dan. The idea of them going to Ireland is not so stupid as you might think. And that seems to be what the Irish annals are trying to tell us. And it seems to be saying that they brought the stone with them. They certainly had the opportunity. So what's all this thing about the Milesians? That's the next lot that come along. They defeat the tribe of Dan, the Danites, and they take over. And sometime after the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians in 586 BC, right? We've done the Assyrians. The Babylonians, the next bunch, they come along and they siege Jerusalem and they carry away everybody and take all the treasures that they can get their hands on, the typical looting Babylonians. And they go back to Babylon with all the gear and they take away the remaining Jews from Jerusalem, and where they're going to wail by the waters of Babylon. And you're going to have Daniel the prophet, and all of that's going to go on after this. So they're coming along in 586 BC. But they don't take everyone. I just want to finish that thing about what happened to the Jews when they were taken away. Their last king was called Zedekiah. And he had made a pact with the Babylonians. They'd actually put him on the throne, deposed the last guy, Hezekiah, put him on the throne, made a pact. He's going to pay them so much tax per year, so many bars of gold and silver. And then once they'd gone, he went to the Egyptians and said, "Oh, you know, can we make an alliance? You know, these Babylonian guys, they're a real pain. They want all this money, and you know, you're great kings." And the Bible, God warns and said, "Don't do that. You know, you're leaning on a reed. The king of Egypt's not going to really help you." And of course, then the Babylonians came back really angry with him, killed all his sons in front of him, blinded him, took him back to Babylon and beheaded him. End of the line of David. End of the line of David. And God's made all these promises to David that there'll never lack a man on his throne, etc., etc. Out the window. Poor old, Zedekiah's being beheaded, his son's killed, finished. But the Bible tells us something else. It says that there was a guy called Jeremiah, the prophet, who took the princesses of the royal house, the daughters, and took them to Egypt. And they went to a place called Tarpenes, or Daphne, which is on the border of Egypt and Israel. And there they were well received by the Pharaoh of Egypt. So I looked into this whole story. What's going on here? What's all this about? Who are these Milesians that are supposed to, according to the Irish annals, are supposed to have come to Ireland via North Africa and Spain? Who the hell are these Milesians? Again, if you start looking in the standard histories, etc., blah, 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 you look it up on the internet and say, oh yeah, the Milesians, that just comes from the Latin milesus, it means a soldier. These are soldiers, basically, who came over from Spain, don't think anything of it. No, that's not what the Irish annals tell us at all. It tells us there was a bloke called Milede, or Miletus, and he's also called Gallo, and he came to Ireland via North Africa and Spain, and he married the daughter of the King of Ireland. Well, there was a city called Miletus, and at this time that we're talking about, around 586, sack of Jerusalem, well, between 700 and 550 BC, Miletus was the greatest city in Ionia. It was the city of the Greeks. Had colonies all over the place, including in Egypt and on the Black Sea. And there were a lot of Milesians who worked as mercenaries, and they worked for the Egyptians as mercenaries. And those are the ruins of Miletus today. It was later sacked by the Persians. But anyway, here you can see Miletus. It's really no distance to go across to Egypt from there if you've got boats, which they had. And these are the people, I think, are the so-called sea people that Velikovsky talks about. But that's another story. So just to put us into context, I'm not inventing all this. Here is the 26th dynasty of Egypt, according to Manetho, and we know this pretty confidently because we can date it from 525, which is when the Persians invaded Egypt and conquered it, Cambyses, 525. So we know that Ahmosis was deposed at that time, so we can count back. They give us the dates of the rulerships of the different pharaohs, so we can date exactly back who was ruling when. Very easy. So we can see that during this period, Pharaoh Afres, in 586, he was on the throne. He's the Pharaoh Hophra that it talks about in the Bible. And his father was this guy called Sarmaticus II. And he's the guy who defeated the king of Judah, called Josiah, in 609, in a battle at Mount Megiddo. Stupidly, the king of Judah went out. He didn't really want to fight him. He was going off to fight other people, the Syrians. And Judah, the king of Judah, came out and fought him and died. Caused a lot of trouble. So we know who Sarmaticus was. And interestingly, in the Irish annals, it tells us all about how there was a pharaoh, I think they call him Samtek. Well, not so far different, who had X thousands of chariots and so many men and all these people working, in his army, etc. He's the guy that was employing the Milesians. So they worked as mercenaries for Pharaoh Sarmaticus II and his son Aphares, Pharaoh Hophra, in the Bible. And they, along with their Scythian allies, were expelled from Egypt by Pharaoh Moses in 567. So who are the Scythians then? How come Scythia? Come on, that's in Russia somewhere, isn't it? North of the Black Sea. What's Scythians doing down there? Read Herodotus. It tells us how there was a Scythian invasion. They sacked Nineveh. Or was it Ecbatana? They took over the whole of that region. Just there had been these parts of the Assyrian Empire just a little bit before then. And then they were going to invade Egypt. The Egyptians bought them off. Anyway, so they are the ancestors of the Scots. The word Scot comes from Scute, Scythian. And that's why Robert the Bruce, when he writes the Declaration of Arbroath, says we're descended from the Scythians. Quite right, correct. But not the Scythians. He didn't come from Russia. They had been working as mercenaries with the Egyptians at the time of Moses, kicked them all out. Didn't like the mercenaries who were working for his predecessor. So then they had to wander all the way around North Africa and Spain, eventually ending up in Ireland and going to Scotland. So here you can see our migrations. You come down here to Nineveh, and then they go back, but some of them go to Egypt, to Tarpenes. They join. There's also Milesians there. We also have Jeremiah the prophet bringing the princesses here. A whole bunch of caboodle go off and end up in Ireland. It makes sense. It fits. I can't prove it, but it fits. It fits the pattern. We're detectives here. We're doing detective stories. It's better than Inspector Morse or Midsummer Murders. This is a real thing. So, is there any evidence from the stone itself? This block of sandstone, this mute lump of stuff that these guys brought along with them. Why the hell did they bring a lump of stone with them in the first place? What's this all about? Well, this is where it gets really fun and interesting for you scientists, because we're starting to do some science. There's numbers. Measure it. I got the measurements from the Westminster Abbey Guide from 1971. I bet they're not in the one now, but they were in there then. And I realised that it said that this length here was 10.5 inches. And I think it was something like 16.5 that way and 26 3/4 or something that way. Oh, funny, weird measures. And then it clicked. 10.5 inches is half a cubit, Egyptian cubit. An Egyptian cubit is 21 inches. 1.5 half cubits gave me my length this way, and 2.5 gave me my length that way. So it's a block of stone that's 1 by 1.5 by 2.5, measured in half Egyptian cubits. Why was it not measured in whole Egyptian cubits? The Ark of the Covenant has, incidentally, the top of the Ark of the Covenant, the mercy seat where God sits, is 1.5 by 2.5 cubits. And this is 1.5 by 2.5 half cubits. Had they measured it in cubits and not half cubits, it would be 8 times as heavy. It would be 24 hundredweight instead of 3 hundredweight. And how many men would you need to be carrying that around with you when you're off on your travels? So that's why they scaled it down. And it produced this very interesting triangle. It doesn't look all that interesting when you first see it, but has side 8, 5, and 7. And I puzzled over that for quite a while, And I thought, what the hell's this for? What the hell are they doing here? It's not a right angle there, by the way. And I realised if you dropped a perpendicular down this way, it cut that 1 to 4. This angle here is actually 60 degrees. I worked that out using trigonometry, which I don't suppose they had at the time they were making the stone. But I cheated and I used trigonometry and I worked it out. It's exactly 60 degrees. So you drop perpendicular here, you had a 4, 8, root 3, 4 root 3 triangle, which means that the angle at the top there was 30 degrees. I also dropped one this way, and I'll show you that. Yeah. If you drop one that way, that's 2.5 to 5, 60, 30, 90, triangle again, 2.5 times root 3 that length. Yeah. But what's interesting is that this whole length was 8. So this must be 5.5. And you think, oh, well, come on, Adrian, so what? Well, it's the basis actually of the ad quadratum system of architecture. I didn't include the other bit that I could have done, the ad triangulum system, but we hadn't got time for that. So it now enables us to square the circle. Because if you once you've got that length 5.5, it's not that hard to get that length being 5.5, 5.5, 5.5. Draw a square, and the square will have a side 11. 4 times 11 is 44. And interestingly, you've got this line that's 7. You draw a circle with that. Yeah, 2 pi r, 44. So it squares the circle. It gives you the circle. It has the same perimeter as the square. But interestingly, you can then also use that length as a height and draw a pyramid. It gives you what's called a pi pyramid, which is the type of pyramid that the Great Pyramid is. Isn't that interesting? So it actually enables you to get the dimensions of the Great Pyramid, or scaled down, of course. And what's even more interesting is there's a story in the Westcar Papyrus about how King Khufu wanted to get the measures for his pyramid so he would have the numbers of Thoth. And he sent his magician, Jedi, he said, yeah, I need numbers of Thoth so I can get them right for my pyramid. And he said, well, I don't know them off the top of my head, but there's a box in the room of revision in Heliopolis, in the temple there. It's in that box. This is how it's translated in the article I've read by Gardner in the Westcar Papyrus. I don't think it was a box. It calls it a flint box. Well, you can't make a box out of flint. Now, come on, flint doesn't easily work to be made into a square box. But you can have a block of sandstone, which is shaped exactly like the Stone of Destiny, and it will give you those measures. Now, here's another bit of interesting sideline. Julius Caesar came to Britain in 55 BC, and again in 54 BC, and he talked to the Druids and the local people, and they told him that Britain was shaped like a triangle. And it had sides, you can read this in De Bello Gallica, had sides 475 miles, 760 miles, and 665 miles. And I thought again, well, what's all that about? Very exact and complete nonsense, of course, because Britain's not shaped like that, but why are they saying that? If you divide each side by 95, it gives you 785 again, exactly the same triangle that would produce the pyramid. So this was knowledge that was obviously in Britain at the time when Julius Caesar was here by the priesthood, the Druids. So we come back to Jacob's ladder, right? So there's Jacob. Yeah, this is how you see it in paintings. He's fast asleep. He's having a nice dream. Angels going up and down the ladder. I don't think it was like that. I don't think that's what he dreamt at all. I think he dreamt that. The ladder they're going up and down is a pyramid. And the pyramid is supposed to enable you to get back to heaven. And that's what it's all about. Now, I'm coming back. I said I'd come back to Bertie Gray. Now, when they stole the Stone of Destiny and they broke it, they thought, oh, heck, what are we going to do? We've got to get it fixed. We're going to be in big trouble. So they took it to the local stonemason in Socky Hall Street, Bertie Gray, who was a Glasgow councillor and a Scots nationalist, but of the romantic kind rather than the Alex Salmond kind. So he drilled holes into the stone and put copper tubing in there to fix it together again and to hold it, repaired it. Did a very good job, actually. But during the course of that, he had some fragments of the stone. And this guy, what's his name? George Thompson. Reverend George Thompson was doing research on the Stone of Destiny, and he was obviously a good good chatter and a good talk. He's from Northern Ireland, and persuaded Bertie to part with at least some of these fragments. And then he was a British Israelite, which is something else. That's belief that the Israelites, the 10 tribes, ended up here, but that's another story. We'll save that one. He persuaded him to give him some fragments, and then he or some friends went to Bethel and dug around. They found some rocks, sandstone. They've been told there's no sandstone in Israel. Well, they found sandstone in the Bethel area, took a sample, brought it back, and then got a geologist to compare the two under a microscope. And he said the geologist was not told where the rocks were in advance, concluded that it's possible that the specimens may be very closely related, both in space and time. They may both be part of a rock bed, which shows a gradual structure. I got a video, someone gave me a video of a lecture about all this, so I took a couple of slides off it. That's the sample from Bethel, from the video. And that's a sample taken from the Stone of Destiny. Now, I'm not a geologist, I can't judge. I would love someone to do this again under scientific laboratory conditions, get the stone, take a little sample off it, go to Bethel, get a little rock, all being photographed, all carefully scripted, things put in sealed bags, etc. Scientific, undisputable. But to my eye, those look pretty much the same. So who knows what's going on here, but I leave that with you. And you'll find a lot more. This is only covering in a fairly superficial way. The evidence, etc., you'll find in my book. I brought a few copies along with me. And that's it. Stone of Destiny's remarkable properties providing easy geometry numbers of Thoth. Was such a stone known in antiquity? Yes, we confer its existence from the Westcar Papyrus, time of the pyramids were built. This document tells us of a box and provide the numbers of Thoth. The box can be understood as really a throne stone. Now, interestingly, we were talking about Osiris last time I was here. When you look at pictures of Osiris sitting on his throne from various papyri, you'll see tucked underneath it what looks very much like, the side view of the stone stuck underneath the throne of Osiris. And the evidence from Julius Caesar shows that triangle was known at the time of the Druids. And it may be that the stone we have now is only a copy. Maybe it's only a copy. Who knows if it's only a copy? Maybe they lost it in the Irish Sea at some time. I don't know. But that's not what's important. What's important is the knowledge. The 1.5, 2.5 stone, which gives you the pyramid. And I think it's a precious relic. So there we are. That's the Stone of Destiny in a nutshell. Any questions, anyone? You're all gobsmacked.
Reading my Bible, I knew about Samson.
Yeah.
I think Jacob might have been related if he was using a 300-weight pillow.
Explain, please.
Well, how did he puff up his pillow? A 300-weight?
Yeah.
Carrying it around.
Yeah. Well, I guess maybe it was half buried. Yes.
One observation first. Bethel means the house of God.
Yes.
So there is a connection there, the origin.
Yeah.
But, how did Jacob happen to come across this stone? That was it. I couldn't quite get it.
Well, in the Bible, he just goes to this place. I think Abraham had been there before him, this place Luz, and he has a nap there. And I guess, he hasn't got a nice soft pillow, so he just uses this stone. Maybe it's half buried.
Is Luz in any way connected with Bethel, or had the stone already moved from Bethel?
This is the big question. Was it brought to Bethel from Egypt? And I'm not convinced it's not Egyptian, to be honest with you. But, I've presented you all sides of the argument, as it were, that the pyramids are certainly built long before the time of Jacob. So this knowledge must have been around before that. And it's not impossible, in my opinion, that the stone was nicked at the time of the Exodus and brought to Israel, and a new etymology about Jacob established for it then. But this is just speculation. I can only tell you what's said in the legends and in the books. But it seems to me quite possible it's Egyptian in origin, really, and older than the pyramids.
Thank you very much, Adrian. Most interesting lecture. Can we have...
Thank you.